Well, the transportation of vaccines, of course, is no small matter. Let's speak now to the aviation expert, Desmond Latham. Des, good evening to you. Welcome to the Pulse. I mean, these vaccines need to be moved around quickly. They need to be moved around safely. We can't lose any. They also need to be moved around in a really cool environment. How difficult is it for an ordinary plane, an ordinary passenger airline to do all of that?
Well, most of the vaccines, fortunately, are not in the minus 70 range, which is Johnson & Johnson and a few others that demand this kind of really low level. And of course, South Africa has looked at vaccines that are easier to transport and really have a temperature that's a wider range and not as low. So with that said, you looked at the crate that entered the Emirates airplane. It's not a very large object at all. They're carrying 1 million doses. It was basically the size of a small car going into an airplane and much lighter. So I think most passenger jets have some kind of capacity to carry cargo these days. So we're not going to see a major effect around the world with the use of vaccines. The big issue is security. You know, PPE was in South Africa, there were 500,000 masks that were taken to the airport at the beginning of last year that were being protected by mercenaries. So I think we must see that the security of these vaccines is a much more serious problem than actually being able to transport them.
Well, I mean, we've seen all sorts of things happening at our Tambo over the years, gold disappearing, international foreign currency disappearing. One of the big issues is going to be around temperature. So is it possible to guarantee the temperature during all stages will not go above the maximum? I think for some of the vaccines it's actually as high as 8 degrees Celsius. And I've got to tell you, Days, I've been on a blazingly hot runway at OR Tambo waiting to get out of an aeroplane. The temperature goes very, very high. I mean, this was pre-lockdown. So throughout the entire process, the vaccine's temperature has to be properly controlled.
Yeah, but I mean, there's also been transport of goods for the last 2 or 3 decades using airplanes. One of the good examples is from Kenya, cut flowers going to Europe, and they are very low temperature, kept close to zero. So, I mean, airlines are used to transporting unusual things. In fact, some aircraft carry other aircraft, let alone the space shuttle over time. So I don't think that's going to be a major issue. What you're going to see is that there are specialists in this field. Cargo carriers, Lufthansa is one of them, Emirates is the other, for example, and Qantas is the third. That most of the countries are going to be concentrating on the people with experience. So I don't see a major problem with the carrying of vaccines around the world at those low temperatures. However, in the environment where they're shipped between the aircraft and other forms of transport, yes, there is a problem there. And that's why South Africa, again, I mentioned that we went after vaccines that don't have a minus 70 degree centigrade requirements.
Then I would imagine there's also an issue with the size. Let me just explain what I mean. Whichever airline came through from India via Dubai to South Africa, a pretty big aeroplane, could happily take what you were talking about, could happily maintain the temperature, size of a small car, etc. But the smaller the place you're going to, the smaller the runway that you will have and the smaller the aeroplane that you will have. Now, we're a big country. I mean, there are clinics in many places around the country. You need to move the stuff quickly once it gets going. Would I be correct in saying the smaller the runway, the smaller the aircraft, the harder it is, which means the smaller the place the vaccine is going to, the harder it is?
Yes, and again, you've got to look at the South African conditions. Our pilots and our aircraft are actually designed for short runways and tricky runways in Africa. Our aviators, work for the UN around Africa generally. So we use things called the King Air, which is a twin-engine turboprop plane, which has a shorter runway requirement, and it's much cheaper to operate. And there are many of them in South Africa traveling around, and they can land at most of the strips in the country that are dirt and grass, let alone tar. So again, it's a matter of understanding is there enough dry ice to go into the plane with the cargo. But the actual airplane itself, we are highly experienced and used to traveling in and out of really rough airfields here in Africa.
I mean, a lot of the airlines aren't flying. SAA not flying at the moment. The airlines not really having much passenger business. I mean, they're going. They're not always full. I would imagine they'll be quite keen on the cargo business. Is cargo becoming more important for some of them?
Brilliant question. I mean, only yesterday, Kenya Airlines announced that they were going to convert a few of their passenger planes to cargo. And we know that cargo has picked up some of the slack around world airlines that felt by the passenger drop-off. But it's only a small percentage of what passengers used to gain for airlines as a whole. because there is a limit to what aircraft can carry generally. Most of the stuff around the world, more than 80% goes by ship. So, and there's no ways we're going to get around that. The conversion of some of the business into cargo business from passengers is not going to save many airlines in the world.
Des, I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people who is a, how do I call this, a connoisseur of airline advertising. I don't fly very much, but I love looking at the adverts. I mean, some of them claim you can shower at 20,000 feet. I don't know who would want to do that. But the airline advertising world is wonderful. Now, an airline copywriter is going to have loads of fun with this, right? Fly us, we save the country. Fly us, get a free injection. I mean, I can just imagine what they're going to do with it.
Again, brilliant analysis. I mean, you've got to look at what Qantas is saying. Qantas is saying no jab, no fly. In other words, anyone without a vaccine in the future won't fly Qantas. So all the anti-vaxxers out there, you better catch a wake up, because I'm afraid you're not going to visit your friends in Perth if that's where you want to visit. So many airlines are starting to use the concept of bubbles. In other words, that they will travel between nations, between New Zealand and Australia, for example. And this is going to grow. In SADC, we're hoping that SADC countries come to the party with this with South Africa. And despite our rough variant of COVID-19, that we will have some kind of corridor system to fly to Mauritius or to Zambia or into Angola, DRC, Seychelles and so on. So we can see that there is that kind of concept. And it must be said that all the airlines that are offering something special in the future are the ones we believe that will be sustainable. So what they're going to do is some will be forced to change from quite a high fare carrying to low. They'll offer perks in flight. I mean, Lyft in South Africa is doing this already. They're offering a special wine tasting if you fly to George in Knysna rather than their planes, or George and Cape Town. So you can see that the differentiator in the future is going to move away from packing us in like pilchards, Stephen, which I'm sure you, like me, are very dissatisfied by. And there will be a differentiator. I must stress that IATA is saying now that the airline industry will not return to anything close to 2019 before 2024-25. So we're looking at really a long-term return here.
Des Latham, you're clearly two things. One, an aviation expert, and two, not a fan of the finance minister's cooking. I really do appreciate the time here on Newzroom Afrika at the Pulse. Thank you.